So welcome to this critical conversation about what does learning mean to you. I'm Bob Birch. I'm a web technology specialist with NDSU Agriculture Communication. And this conversation came about, I'm also a member of the NDSU Extension Innovation Team, and at a recent innovation team meeting, we discussed a Journal of Extension article called Redefining the Concept of Learning in Cooperative Extension. And we had just a really interesting, I think, conversation. And so we talked about extending that conversation out to a wider group, more of us with NDSU Extension Service, to get some more input about this question about learning and how it works in cooperative extension. And so that was the genesis of this conversation. I'm going to post some links in the conversation whenever I get an opportunity. I'll start with the link to the Joe article that I referenced before. This conversation is brought to you by the NDSU Extension Innovation Team. I'll share the link to our website shortly, but I'll tell you it right now. It's ag.ndsu.edu/innovation. There's also an NDSU Extension Innovation Facebook group that is not just for the innovation team, but for anybody who's interested in innovation in NDSU Extension. And I'll post the link to that as the conversation goes on as well. Before we post those links and we get into the full conversation, I do want to introduce the panel that I asked to be part of this conversation. Lynette Flage is the Director and Community Vitality Specialist at the Center for Community Vitality. Hey, Lynette. Deb Gebeke, the Assistant Director for Family and Consumer Sciences at NDSU Extension. Deb, do you want to say hi so we can just check your microphone in case?
Hi. Did that work?
I hear you. Awesome.
Okay.
Great. And then Alicia Harstad's joining us. Alicia's an extension agent in Stutsman County, and she's also a fellow member of the NDSU Extension Innovation Team, and we work together in organizing this conversation. So to get things started, in case you haven't read the article, and it's a pretty interesting article, but it's got a lot of stuff in it, a lot of review of learning theories. But for me, it boils down to kind of one central point, and the point that resonates with me is this idea that there's two kinds of learning theories. Learning theories that can be categorized in what the authors of the article call the acquisition metaphor. So that in that metaphor and in those theories, the focus is on the individual mind. It's sort of like you're filling up someone's brain with information, and that information, the context in which that information is delivered is not super important, or even how it's used maybe is not really important. It's like a commodity that you deliver. The knowledge is a commodity, and then it can be applied or transferred or shared or whatever the learner wants to do with it. And the other metaphor that they mention in there that indicates some of the other learning theories is the participation metaphor. And so these are learning theories that stress activities and that the activity of learning is not really separate from the context within that learning opportunity takes place. That context is important. So you'll hear terms like doing and practice and discourse when you see those theories. And it also contains this idea that learning is mediated through culture, like who we are and the communities that we are part of, including the learning communities that we're part of, are important to the whole process of learning. So I think those are two big ideas, and they're kind of central to the article. And as we go on, we can talk about what those mean to us, or if you have questions about them and those kinds of things. I want to start by stopping talking, first of all, which I should have done a little bit ago, and ask Alicia to make some comments. I mean, I come to it from a different perspective, obviously, as a support person. But as an extension agent, Alicia, why do you think this conversation is important or relevant?
Thanks, Bob. I'll tell you the truth. It took me a couple times reading through this because it's very there's a lot of theory behind all this, and sometimes it's kind of I think, a little bit hard to wrap our minds around it a little bit, because it seems like there's basically, like you said, two main themes. Is the I'm a teacher gonna stand up and tell you something, and you learn it, as the acquisition metaphor. But then the participation metaphor, that I think that one's a little bit more difficult, of how do we get to that point. And when we think about what we're doing with extension and our work in extension, I think that starts to get more into that transformation education that we talk about in extension. Or, and I always relate everything to the Kirkpatrick's model, just because that's how we evaluate our model, or our programs, and that's how we get evaluated as extension agents. Is, where did our programs fall on the Kirkpatrick scale? So, and I don't always know if that's right or wrong. And so I guess I'm really excited to hear what Lynette and Deb have to say about kind of that concept. Is because do we need to always, I guess, how should we be setting up our programming, thinking about how are we going to get to that participation metaphor, and how does that line up with how we evaluate our programs? Are the two aligning? In some ways I think yes, in some ways maybe not. And the other thing that really stood out in this article also was it talked about the professional development piece. A lot of times I think when we do professional development, we find ourselves in some of those accusation probably situations where we sit down and we learn a new concept. But then how do we turn that even into a participation metaphor, or a situation in extension? Is that something when, like Bob, you've done those working out loud circles, or, maybe there's some other things that we could be doing to help even support each other in our learning too. So I think there's kind of two ways to even look at this: is how are we doing our programs for the general public, but then also how are we doing professional development in extension? So I guess those were kind of some of my takeaways.
Awesome, Alicia. Thank you. Lynette, Alicia brought up the transformational education model. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, and maybe how you see some of the ideas in this article fitting into that?
Yes, you bet. So if those of you, I hope everyone is aware of the transformational education model, or has seen it, or heard about it at one point in time. Transformational education is really something that we're using nationwide in the extension system. We're thinking about our work in really 4 different quadrants. How do we deliver programs? What's the way that we do it? And the quadrants are actually, it's a 2x2 matrix. On the bottom, it really looks at what kind of content are we providing, and then as we go up the matrix, we look at what's the process we use. So on the bottom left-hand corner, basic content, basic process, it's information. We're sharing information. This is the stuff from our website. This is information that people might come in and ask us a question about in our offices, just some basic information. It's sort of the Google of extension, that basic information that we provide. And we do it, and we do it well, and we need to keep doing that. The second part of the the 2x2 matrix is, I'm going to move over to the right a little bit, the right bottom quadrant, where it's higher content. It's really where we're content transmission. We're transmitting information in those 2, 3, 4-hour programs. We're kind of that sage on the stage. We're up there giving information. We're sharing technical information. We're sharing educational material with our participants. It's something that we do really well. Extension's very good at content transmission, and we've been doing it this way for a very long time. And it's usually about a specific issue that we're in there trying to tackle. If you go up on the 2x2 matrix, kind of looking at the higher process side, we have something called facilitation. So something else we do really well, we're facilitating meetings, we're bringing groups together. Our county extension educators are really great at this because they'll oftentimes put together a meeting, bringing out a specialist, team teaching with them, but they're really facilitating the effort. They're bringing people together, they're getting things prepped, they've got the agenda ready to go. They're the ones really making the transactions happen. And finally, over on the top right quadrant, high process, high content is something we look at as what we call high impact programs, or that things around a very complex issue. It's not just a quick fix. I mean, this is something that's been ongoing for a very long time. There's maybe a community of interest. There's people that are really interested in this particular topic area, and they've been working on it for quite some time. We're building capacity with the people that are working on this particular issue so they can go out and teach others. We're trying to transform them so that they'll go out and work with their families, work with their communities, work with other producers in the region. We're really trying to transform them and build that capacity. There's certainly some evaluation to it, and there is some success to it. So hopefully these high impact programs that we're putting a lot of process into, a lot of content into, these high impact sorts of programs are areas that that we should be working. We need to work in all of those quadrants. So the 4 that I described to you, we do work in all 4 of them. But what Extension's really good at, we've got Google down in the information side. We've got content transmission. We've got our local, I'm trying to think of what was our ag example, Deb, on content transmission. I know facilitation was sort of those crop advisors, those local crop advisors. They're coaching producers.
It was the pesticide program because you're simply transferring content. You are not really getting into transferring the entire experience.
Okay, so yep, pesticide program. Other agencies that might be doing some content transmission, providing some education on different issues. Facilitation, again, maybe those crop advisors, those people that are giving specific advice about or coaching to something really specific, facilitating conversations. And then, but the high impact programs, that transformational work is really something that just Extension does. I mean, we're doing this long-term partnering with other agencies. We're doing long-term relationship work with our producers and our clients. And if we can really focus there, we are tackling those big wicked problems, as we call it, with our partners, but also it's a really big niche for us. And so that's why this is a model that we talk about a lot in our state. We talk about it in the nation. There are actually some states we learned recently in the southern part of the United States that said, oh, this is how we explain what we do. They hadn't heard about transformational education. So we're excited that we've been talking about this for quite some time in North Dakota. Again, I don't want to ever give the message that that's all we should do, because we need to do everything in all of those quadrants, but we should really think about how we focus on that transformational work.
Deb, do you want to add into that about that connection, and maybe if you see connections between how we define learning and the transformational education model?
Well, first to just re-emphasize that for the last several years, I don't know when this was first introduced for Extension, but this has kind of been always the go-to to share in terms of how we operate in Extension. And yet I still think that there are a lot of our staff and tons of our stakeholders out there who maybe don't fully understand this model, and that's nobody's fault. I mean, who sits down and has these conversations on a regular basis? So my first thing is when we talk about learning, and like, the title for this meeting, what is it about learning and Extension? Learning involves so many, and you quoted so many different theories, so many different approaches. I want to throw out one that I recently had someone explain to me in a discussion. I'm a very big follower of brain development and learning theory. And ever since 10, 15 years ago, when they first realized that we could map how we learn by mapping the brain and watching the brain functions, and I find it fascinating what they can do. Well, early on, when they were first doing this, there was brain development learning theory that said all of our brains work differently, which led to learning styles. Do you all remember how there's all those different learning styles? And they're not really wrong, but 10 years later, with everything we have learned in the research on brain development, we know that it's a little deceiving. Brains work differently, so we all have different learning styles, is different than saying all brains have the same capacity to learn in all of these different styles. And we pick preferences. But that doesn't mean my brain can't function more like Lynette's brain or whatever. You know, there's these little nuances that they're coming up with in the literature and in the research, and it's not the area that I work in anymore, so I don't follow it as closely as I should. And the reason it came up in the conversation is we were talking about our Gearing Up program and how we were sharing with parents best to work with their preschoolers, and we were still using some of the learning styles language, and that isn't appropriate anymore, and so we made some changes. So I guess what I want to get across is that all of these theories, things change, things get, little nuances come about all the time, but we also have culture changes that take place at the same time. And right now, whether you want to attribute it to young people or whether you want to attribute to something else in the culture, we know that people don't like the idea of just getting information. Well, you're really going to learn a lot. We're going to give you a lot of information. No, our culture right now is people want experiences. People want to experience something. Well, that fits beautifully into our goal of transformational education. But transformational education is a little different than I'm just going to organize in a meeting and have the expert come and talk. That's content transmission. And for years in Extension, we have rested on content transmission. Okay, I'm talking 20, 30 years ago. And there's a huge shift taking place. It has taken place in many aspects, but we still bucket a lot. And the idea is that we want to create these experiences where people will transform, change a behavior, learn something different, show that you make a difference. I mean, we say it in different ways. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but it's just some random thoughts, which, I was asked to just give random thoughts. There you go.
Hey, Bob, just going to jump in. Lynette here again. Sorry, I got knocked off for a little bit. So here's an example. I love this little quick example, but regarding transformational education, you've all heard the saying, you give a man a fish and he eats for a day, right? That's kind of that information side. You teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. That's that content transmission phase. You help the man revolutionize the fishing industry. Now that's transformational. You've now brought it way beyond just that person and their life, and it's to the community, it's to the greater society. And so that's what we're talking about is kind of a big complex issue, a bigger, it's spreading it even further.
Thanks, Lynette. I want to open it up to everybody who's on the call and really hopefully we can get a conversation going. What drives your approach to learning when you're out there teaching, educating, facilitating, doing all of these things? Like what influences that? How you do it, I should say. Feel free to use the chat, or if you have a microphone, open up your microphone. We'd love to hear from you. Not everybody at once. Settle down. Craig says money is one. Oh, go ahead. Someone was talking. I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, I was just going to say, I don't know entirely if I'm going to answer what you're asking, but for me, developing some good hands-on learning that builds a lot of discussion and interaction and relationship building helps me develop teaching. And I have to say, I'm really proud of two of our colleagues, Nicole Wardner and Katie Wirt, that they have pushed me to try to go an entire year without using PowerPoint. I don't know if that is going to happen, but we have done that in 2 meeting sessions with them, and our producers love it. They truly tell you that they learn so much more and that they love it, but it takes, at least on my side, so many more materials and so much more time and effort to get those activities in order. And so sometimes it's a little bit more challenging, I have to admit. Did that make sense, and did it answer what you wanted to know?
It makes sense. I don't care if you actually answer my question. I'm just trying to get people talking. I mean, my thoughts on it, I guess where I was thinking when I was asking that question were, so I'm getting ready to go out and teach something, and I have to make a decision about how I do that. So what's influencing that decision? Like, is it training? Is it stuff you got at orientation or you get at fall conference? Is it information from college? I mean, I don't want to predispose anyone. Like, what, is it reading semi boring Journal of Extension articles, or where does that come from? And I see Carrie in the chat saying who the audience is. That's good.
This is Marie. I think for me it's adult pedagogy. So because I work with adults in rural leadership, understanding what they need as learners and how that might be different than other audiences. So that's, to me, what I go on, that they need to know why they're learning something, as well as being active in that learning.
Thanks, Marie.
I was going to jump on that too. This is Lynette. Marie, thanks for mentioning that. So the pedagogy of adult learning, as many of you might know, is called andragogy, and it's really thinking about what are the specific needs of the adult learner. And this article that you sent us, Bob, there was that graphic on the third page, or figure on the third page or something like that, and they had 6 items listed: knowledge, reasoning skills, motivation and effect, disposition, identity, contribution to community. And actually those matched up for me really nicely with andragogy, with how do we teach adults? And, because they want to know. And it's all the stuff you guys just wrote in your text boxes. It's just right on with this theory. And this adult learning theory is really what we always push as well. So we've been talking about transformational education, but really adult learning theory is the undergirding of all of this. And these adults we're working with, they have great experiences. They want to share. They want to learn. They want to apply it to their real life. They really want to know because they want to make a difference. I mean, all of this that you're writing is just spot on to what adult learning theory is all about, and which is what we do.
Thanks, Lynette. And I see Ryan shared a file here. I'm not sure what it is, but thanks, Ryan. I'm sure that'll add some depth to the conversation. So appreciate that. He's captured that image. Thanks. So Ryan just shared that image that Lynette was taking a look at. Thanks, Ryan. So I'm catching up on here. I see Craig saying have to stay current learning on topics, otherwise they'll go somewhere else and tie it into real life issues that producers, etc., and understand to their lives. I think that's sort of I think that's part of what you were talking about, right, Lynette, is like making it real to them. And to me, that really does speak to that participation metaphor, right? If you instead of standing up and delivering a PowerPoint, if you let people have a conversation, they might not only understand things a little bit better and get better information from the conversation, they might also have practiced a skill that they can put to use in other areas of their community and their lives, of teaching someone else or having a conversation.
So think about it for a minute, Bob, everybody. If you go back to the last workshop, meeting, whatever you called it, that you conducted, and if it was pesticide training, which is, a mainstay, and you took them through 60,000 PowerPoint slides, and when they were done, they endured it, and they walked out of there and got a certificate. What would have been different if you had, instead of using those PowerPoint slides, you might need to use a few, but if you had set up some activities for them to engage in when they walked in the room, and then had discussion around those activities which made each point on that PowerPoint, how would they have left the room? The participatory piece is what leads to some transformation. And that's where this article parallels very well with what we try to do in extension, get to the participatory piece. Or if it's a hot topic and you brought in the expert and they lectured for an hour and the meeting's over, afterwards, have you ever noticed how people hang around, if it was engaging anyway, and they might hang around for a half hour, an hour, and keep talking to each other and asking questions. Well, then that's a sign that you have some participatory level going. But how much better could it have been if you'd have started the meeting with at least identifying what their thoughts were, what their main concerns were, then let the person speak and then build those concerns into the presentation. A good speaker can do that. So when we talk about this, I always want people to put it into context, into your personal examples, and think about the next time you're involved with, whether it's, big iron or whether it's roundup or whatever kinds of things that you're involved in, how can I make them participatory? And I have been told, for example, that bringing the dermascan machine in, and I know several of our FCS agents brought that into the pesticide training, and how that just helped to create a little bit of a buzz, and it was something other than the PowerPoint, and it was a nice gesture. Well, it might have been far more than a nice gesture. It might have set the stage for people to shift a little bit into participatory learning. So I just wanted you to put this into the context of using some real examples.
Thanks, Deb. And Cindy is saying in the chat that she just did that at pesticide training this year. Had some demonstration stations before her presentation. She said very successful. I don't know if you have microphone hooked up, Cindy. Do you want to expand on that? If you do, you're welcome to.
Hi. Yep.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So, yep, I did have those demonstration stations set up, and I had done a similar thing last year too, where I had the dermascan, like what Deb was talking about. This year, the demonstration stations had to do with the sun safety beads, using the sun safety beads, sun sensitive beads, actually, demonstrating the effectiveness of sunglasses, clothing, and sunscreen in, preventing exposure to the UVA and UVB rays. And it was done by those demonstrations. And then when I had a little slide to point to that, that they were ready to talk about it, and oohs and ahs and wows, and couldn't believe it all over the place. It was great.
Awesome. Thanks, Cindy. Kim Busha, I don't know if you have a microphone hooked up, but you've done. I'm thinking of the videos about engaging adult learners and maybe some strategies for that. Do you have any thoughts on other ways we can get adult learners participating more in their learning? Maybe Kim's not listening right now, but I see her
am
face.
listening,
Oh, I see.
Bob.
Okay.
I just can't click my buttons fast enough. Yeah, those were there are 4 and little short videos, and Bob turned me on to Mix, which is a quick little thing you can add to your PowerPoints, and it makes them come alive. And I think just that itself is an interactive learning thing, because you feel more engaged just by having a PowerPoint that's, speaking to you, and things are happening on the screen rather than just flipping through slides. So I would just encourage people, although it's really highly anxiety producing for me to promote something I've done and my face is on it, I would say there are a lot of little tips and tricks in those videos that you could use. But Deb has also asked me to start thinking about how we could use some other little actual video snippets to put together and to expound on some of those, like even just setting up the environment, and the littlest things can make a difference. When I think about if you're talking about weeds, to bring in a vase of weeds and make them look, florally, and have them as a part of your environment in the room. And if you're talking about children at a particular age, having some of the, the toys or the things that kids work with, maybe, or just with parenting. I just feel like there's so many things that we can do to sort of set the stage coming in, both with our marketing and also with the environment, as well as all the things that you've talked about once they get started and you're working on it. I did want to mention too, there's a really nice piece that Deb has put up in our, Deb, help me please. It's under like planning and reporting, planning and something.
Yeah, program planning and reporting on the
Thank you. Program planning and reporting, and it's a really nice piece on adult learning that if you read through that, it just has so many pieces in there that help, you know, quickly relate to the kinds of work that we're all doing, and to help you, to remind you about adult learners. And I think I'll say one more last thing, and that is sometimes if we just feel really empowered ourselves to recognize how important this kind of learning is, we are better at instructing people to do it. And when we're confident and just tell people, you know, divide into groups, or this is how we're doing this, or this is how we're doing that, and just kind of move them right into it, they're less resistant. If we're standing back kind of feeling like, oh, this group isn't going to do it, then they probably aren't. But if we're pretty confident in it and just go in very well planned and practiced, they're going to be connecting to it, maybe not this time, but maybe the next meeting. So I would encourage everybody to try it.
Thanks, Kim. And we'll try and get some of those links to some of those resources shared either in the chat, or I'll share them in the notes when we post this recording on the Extension Innovation page. I'm monitoring the comments. I see Lisa is talking about state drought meetings where the speakers have told the attendees what they were doing and what they should know. Interestingly, soon the attendees took over the meeting and let the meeting leaders know those weren't the discussions they were interested in. That's pretty interesting, and pretty interesting that sort of was allowed to happen. I guess I don't know how you stop it necessarily, but it's interesting. And so there's some conversation about that. I encourage you to check out in there. I see Craig saying that Deb's ideas for pesticide class works, and he's not using PowerPoints anymore in the class. They lead the learning. I play what ifs with them to start them talking, or use current pesticide issues in county and state. I'd be interested in more examples. If you guys have more examples of this, it sounds like there's a lot more of this kind of participation going on out there than I was aware of. I definitely learned some new things today. Does anybody have other examples of sort of this more participatory approach, or do you have questions about some of these learning theories and thoughts about learning, the transformational education, anything like that? Go ahead and open your microphone or throw them in the chat. Leaving some space for you, just in case anyone wants to jump in. So, how do we define learning then? I don't know if we have to necessarily come up with a textbook definition, but I think Alicia mentioned it at the very beginning about is how we evaluate learning lining up with what kind of learning we want to deliver. So maybe what does this look like? What does successful transformational education look like? Does anybody want to jump in on those questions about what learning looks like at NDSU Extension?
Bob, this is Lynette. I think learning is very participatory at NDSU Extension. I think our staff did a great job, and I'm seeing some really nice examples on the conversation even about getting the learners engaged, participating. They're using those principles of adult learning. They're working on transformational sorts of issues. And I believe if we went out and evaluated all the people we've worked with, even in the last, 2 years, there would be some really incredible transformation that's happened in people's lives, in their communities, on their farms. That, I think, is our biggest challenge, is that we don't have the opportunity or the capacity necessarily to get after some of the, we did some really amazing things here and people have done a nice job with this, but how did we make a difference? and I know we're getting much better at our evaluation. We're looking at those levels 3 and 4 and continuing to work on that. But that, I think, is probably a big challenge for us, that we see constantly. And how do we try to grapple with that a little bit more is something I'm always challenged with myself.
Bob, your question initially was, is how we evaluate learning, or does how we evaluate learning line up with what we are learning? And I just wanted to emphasize kind of what Lynette just said. When we adopted the 4 levels of evaluation theory, that model really overlays very well with transformational education. And that's why maybe if you hadn't thought about before, maybe this is an opportunity to imagine that quadrant again. And if you're only doing information, if you're basically in the Google quadrant, and you're just asking and evaluating, saying, you know, how was your experience? Do you like our headings? Do you like the way the buttons you get to push? Whatever. I mean, that's level 1. That's just all basic stuff. How was your experience? But if you really are moving up into the transformational quadrant, that's when you get to what Lynette was saying, where you're able to really understand what did people do different. And I was looking at the example that was put in here that Katie Wirt did. When Katie Wirt took them to the range and actually started to get them to apply what she was teaching, and they not only just applied it, I could do an experiment in the kitchen, but I'm applying it to my field, my range, my whatever, and seeing, oh gosh, we've got some problems here, or we've got some things we need to be careful, or hey, we're doing pretty good. That's level 4. That's level 3 and 4, I should say. And so they line up very nicely. I think our organization as a whole stepped out a long time ago to say, hey, not only transformational education, but we want to evaluate it appropriately. And if people are using that model and really working toward that type of evaluation, they're going to get it. They're going to have an end product that shows the impacts that we are making a significant difference. And where people get hung up in is that they get, I don't know, a little concerned that I don't know if I can do it right, or they're overwhelmed even just by the thought of it. And we have always offered, and every year, the latest one that we just worked with was Naeem. Every year we're always working with more people to get them to understand how to better evaluate and get the impact that they want to be able to prove. We can help with that. Don't let that stop or overwhelm you. That's the part that is, there's plenty of people or resources or to do. You simply have to commit to saying, I will do my best to deliver a program that provides me an opportunity to evaluate at level 3 and 4.
Awesome. Thanks, Deb. Yeah, I want to call out some of those things in the chat. Deb was talking about Lisa's comment that Katie Wirt did with range management. Craig saying leave topics, agenda, leaving them really general seems to get more people to come to a workshop for him. That's interesting. And Carmen's sharing that she did a youth lead local event on election day last November. After giving the students tips and tools, they came up with an issue they wanted to work on and let them go. It was exciting to see their action plans come to fruition. That's awesome. I think that's an awesome example, as the other ones we've had are. Marie, you were going to open your microphone. Maybe you said what you need to say, what you wanted to say in the chat, but did you want to? I saw you open your microphone a little bit earlier.
I just wanted to piggyback on what Lynette was saying about the evaluation. Without getting information back from our participants about what they perceived as their learning, we really don't know if they've learned. And so when you asked Bob about what the definition for learning is, it really it can be our definition. However, I think the basis of learning is our participants telling us that they've learned and here's what they've learned. We're hopeful it's in the areas that we wanted them to learn in. In rural leadership, we have 4 goals, And we're hopeful that those 4 are met through our curriculum. However, until I get feedback from them through an evaluation, be it on Qualtrics or myself asking or in conversation or them demonstrating through their project, which all of them have to do, we really don't know if learning occurred. So that's why I wanted to piggyback on what Lynette was saying.
Thanks, Marie. I think as I'm glancing at the conversation in the chat, I think that the chat is probably ahead of me here. But as you were describing that, Marie, I thought, evaluating what they learned, I think that falls into, for me, that falls into the acquisition metaphor, right? I think what the participation metaphor in the article is really talking about as a couple things. One that's mentioned in the chat, I see I see behavior change in there in quotation marks, and I think that's definitely something that's worth talking about related to learning. But I guess for me, I'm wondering if some of the outcome is, changed communities, like people putting this into practice, not just in an individual way to improve their own lives or communities, but putting this knowledge to work in a way and participating in a way that improves their community, whatever community they exist in, whether that's geographic or a community of interest or a community of practice or whatever it might be. That wasn't a question. I was just throwing stuff out there, so feel free to jump in and argue with me.
Well, I would concur with the bigger idea of if our participants are able to go out and affect other change, I mean, go back to ripple effect, ripple mapping, that is more the transformational education that we are looking for. Can we get that at all times? I don't know. I think there are stages of that learning, right? Because if a person has to first understand themselves, they have to first learn about themselves, as well as what subject we're trying to work with them, they probably aren't going to get to transformational. So I would say maybe that it depends is a comment there, Bob.
Yeah. Thanks, Marie. So what about behavior change? Because like I said, until Carrie mentioned it in the chat, it hasn't really come up. Is that something, and I'm sort of pointing at Lynette and Deb, but please anybody jump in, like how central is that to how NDSU Extension Service views learning?
Oh, it's very central. I mean, that's really where you're looking at level 3, 4 evaluation. So that's, that model that we use, the Kirkpatrick evaluation model, which again, as Deb mentioned, it overlays all of these other things. It really, they all work together so nicely. But yeah, behavioral change is big. I mean, we definitely hope that people are changing their behavior based on what they learned instead of, well, okay, I learned that I shouldn't put this pesticide on my flowers or this chemical on my flowers, so hopefully they change their behavior and they don't do it, or whatever that might be. Some of them are quick and simple changes, others are larger and longer term. So I think that that definitely is a big part of what we're trying to get people to do. And when we talk about transforming their lives and communities, it's part of our purpose. That is that behavioral change for individuals and for their community.
I think we have to be careful not to assume that every single thing we do is transformational. We certainly have a place operating in that informational or Google square, as we like to call it. So there's not to pit one against the other. But the truth is that our decision makers, the people who fund us, our legislators, and our county commissioners, are using the line, well, why do we need you when we could just Google it? And so what that does for me, and I hope does for everyone else, is just causes you to pause and say, all right, is the way I'm presenting this information, is the meeting I've designed or developed something they could have just Googled? Or what am I doing to take them beyond Google? And so that's why we like that model, because if everything we do is something they could Google, they will not appreciate the money they're spending on the people involved. But if they can see that there is more value than just Google, I got to apply this to my situation and benefit from it. Okay, now we've got legislators and commissioners and so forth who are going to have a different sense of value for your work. So it's critical to give this good thought.
So there's all kinds of awesomeness happening in the conversation, so I want to acknowledge that. And, but I'm gonna, you said, legislators, county commissioners might say, some might say, well, what do we need you for if we have Google? So let me play devil's advocate. Be clear, this is a devil's advocate position, just to hopefully spark some conversation. What if we are bringing people together and they're having conversations, and someone equally as cynical says, what do we need you for? If we just put people in a room, they'll figure stuff out, if you're not being the expert or the sage on the stage.
Well, the other main factor about extension is that we pride ourselves in being research-based. So you can have a room full of people and 650 things to click on in a Google search, but how do you pick out what is the most credible information? And hopefully we are there to guide them to the most credible information. And notice I said guide them to, because sometimes it's us. I mean, I can't be an expert in everything, and neither can anyone else. So sometimes we are the experts, so to speak, but equally important is we are able to guide them to, well, here's what Sam Markell's last publication had to say, or here's what I know the Department of Public Health has come out saying about type 2 diabetes, or, we guide them to the most credible information that we can. And that's a valuable thing in this world today when we don't know what to believe half the time.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback on that too. I think, so the guiding too, I think I would call that something in the facilitation quadrant, because we are helping, yep, Bob, you said you could just throw a bunch of people in a room, and I know you're being facetious here, I know, but you could throw a bunch of people in a room and have them figure it out for themselves, by using Google. But you know what? They don't always know what they're trying to figure out either, and that's what we're really good at. We're really good at facilitating. That's what our county network is so strong, because those of you that live out in the state know the people in your community. You know what the issues are. You know what those big problems are, and you're the ones that bring those people together in the room. And so, even if you coach them or let them talk or be the teacher or the leader, whatever it is, you're the ones that can kind of, bring the right people together even. That's another huge skill that we have, that a huge strength. I think it's a huge strength that we have. Before I forget, I wanted to throw this out at everybody. This has to do with youth teaching. So it's teaching in the K-12 schools, but I think some of the concepts are kind of neat. There was a TEDx presenter in Fargo a couple of years ago. Her name is Kayla Delzer, and her TEDx presentation title is Reimagining Classrooms, Teachers as Learners and Students as Leaders. And it's really about kind of bringing the people together for that conversation. And she teaches young children. So I know we do that work with 4-H certainly, but she's got some really neat concepts in there that help us think about this participatory learning, help us think about releasing the power. We're not the one always doing all the talking and all the technical sharing. It is that facilitation. It's bringing those people together so they can learn on their own. I know Ryan did a good comment a little earlier. He said that he had a good comment about you bring people, you've had these agronomy meetings, structured more as a conversation. And that's really that facilitation, that coaching part that we are so good at, that it is hard to think about Google doing it all.
And that makes me think of the other theory mentioned in this article, and briefly, it's Piaget. And for those of you who have had any study of child development, human development, he was one of the first people who specifically wanted to take a close look at how children learn, which is differently from how adults might learn. And he's one of the first people who pointed out the experiential as well as the discovery. You know, giving kids a bunch of worksheets is not the way they best learn. They learn by discovery. Okay, now that is a theory and one that has held up a long time. And actually, I think one of the reasons I thought it was interesting it was mentioned in this article is because we're finding that it isn't really so different for adults. And so ditto to what you said, Lynette, and it just brings us back to the article again that they point that out too.
Yeah, and it brings in that idea from the article about context matters, right? Context
Yes.
For Kayla Delzer, shout out to West Fargo Public Schools where Kayla used to work. Yay. That just the physical environment matters, right? That context matters, but also the context of the community when Lynette was talking about delivering these things locally and knowing the local issues and facilitating in that way. Like, I think that's really interesting. Context definitely matters. Lots of great stuff in the chat. I'm not going to be able to keep up with it all, but as we're sort of reaching the natural end, because despite this being a conversation about innovation and learning, I'm still stuck on the hour time, 50 minutes of talking and 10 minutes to clean up. So anything else that anyone else has to share, thoughts, questions, concerns that we haven't addressed? Does anybody have anything else they want to throw out there? Okay. So here's my big shot at evaluation. Does a conversation like this, is it helpful? Would you like to see more of them? Was this just a nice way to spend 52 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon? Or and if you would like to see more, like what kinds of things do you want to discuss? Thanks, Becky. Becky says, makes me take a break from busyness and think about an important topic. Craig, very helpful to me using this format. Great, thanks. Examples, Jody, yeah, I thought the examples were fantastic. We'll make sure that we capture all those. Great, Kayla, thank you. If you have different thoughts and you don't feel comfortable sharing them in the chat, you can email me. And I don't offend easily, so feel free to be honest. Thanks, Kim and Lisa, Kayla.
Bob, so I'm cheating. I'm talking instead of typing it, but I think it was very helpful for me to see, and I know what's going on out in the field a lot, and I just think it's so impressive. I think what we do is amazing work, and I think it's very transformational. Again, I'm going to go back to the evaluation piece of it. I think we struggle with that a bit, so I would love to have a conversation with everybody to share, again, something like this, to share ideas about what are you doing? How are you getting some of that feedback from participants, not just in the survey way, but what else are you doing to figure this out and to see that some of the things are transformational? I would love to hear more about what people are doing. I think it would be helpful if we could all kind of get around a discussion in regards to that.
Awesome. Thanks, Lynette. Some topic suggestions in the chat too, Marie. That's a great one. Becky has a plug in there about ACOM needs photos. We can't get away without having that plug in there. And I have a couple other plugs Ryan mentioned in the chat. If you're interested in joining the innovation team, we'd love to have you. Let us know. Ryan and Katie Wirt are our co-chairs right now, so you can contact them. I did have an opportunity to interview the authors of the article we're talking about on my podcast, so I'm going to post that link in there. You can find it's the first one on the list there. on my SoundCloud page. So if you want to hear more from them, it was kind of an interesting conversation, I thought. So anything else for the good of the order?
I'm just going to emphasize the continuation of the discussion of how we evaluate. And my reason for emphasizing that is that several of you made comments. I think Lisa said we're doing a lot than people realize, or than we are documenting. I think that's precisely the point. We still have plenty of our staff that are they just don't do. They don't do an evaluation, or they don't even turn in an impact report. Or we still have people who resist that when that is the that's the golden prize at the end of all of this, to be able to share that, document, share how we are doing this so that people know. I agree we're doing a lot of it, but we just have to do better at getting the word out there and proving that we are making a difference. So I would ditto that suggestion. Anything we could do to help staff feel more comfortable, and just try it. Let people walk you through once. It isn't that hard. You can do it.
Great. Thanks, Deb. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. One last plug. The next NDSU Extension Innovation Team event is Tech Coffee Break. It's the first Monday of every month because of the holiday. It will be September 11th is the next one, 3 p.m. Central. Hope you can join us for that as well. Thanks, everybody. Recording will be out there. Let's keep this conversation going in whatever way we can as well. Have a great day.